In the quiet, tree-lined streets of Willow Creek Estates, life moved at a predictable rhythm. The neighborhood was picture-perfect, rows of neatly trimmed lawns, flower beds bursting with color, and driveways hosting shiny SUVs that seemed to whisper suburban success. It was the kind of place where people waved hello as they passed each other on morning walks, and kids rode their bikes down sidewalks without a care in the world. But beneath this serene surface lay an invisible web of rules, enforced by none other than Karen Miller, one of the most zealous members of the Homeowners Association, HOA. Karen wasn't just any ordinary HOA board member. She took her role very seriously, almost obsessively so. To her, the HOA handbook wasn't just a set of guidelines, it was sacred scripture. Every clause, every footnote, every tiny detail mattered deeply to Karen. From ensuring no mailbox dared to stray from its approved shade of beige to making sure no car parked on the street overnight, she patrolled the neighborhood like a self-appointed guardian of order. Her neighbors often joked about how she probably dreamed in bullet points, but behind closed doors, many admitted they found her constant vigilance exhausting. Despite Karen's over-the-top enthusiasm for enforcing rules, most residents tolerated her because, well, she did keep things running smoothly. Sure, some thought she went too far, like when she sent letters reminding people to clean bird droppings off their windshields. But overall, the neighborhood remained peaceful under her watchful eye. That is, until Jake Thompson moved into the house 2 doors down. Jake was different. He wasn't flashy or loud, but there was something effortlessly cool about him. With his leather jacket, sunglasses, and laid-back demeanor, he stood out in a sea of khakis and polo shirts. When he first introduced himself to the neighborhood, Karen gave him a polite nod, sizing him up silently. At the time, she had no idea what she was dealing with, or rather who. You see, Jake wasn't just another suburban dad looking to settle down. He was Judge Jacob Thompson, a man whose name commanded respect in courtrooms across the county. Known for his sharp mind and even sharper rulings, Jake was not someone you wanted to cross. Not unless you enjoyed being on the wrong side of justice. But Karen didn't know any of this yet. All she saw was a new neighbor who, within weeks of moving in, brought home a sleek black motorcycle. It gleamed in the sunlight, its polished chrome accents catching the eyes of anyone who passed by. To Jake, it was more than just a mode of transportation. It was freedom on 2 wheels, a reminder of simpler times before robes and gavels defined his days. But to Karen, it was nothing short of a disaster waiting to happen. The motorcycle stuck out like a sore thumb in Willow Creek Estates. Where every driveway boasted sedans and minivans, here was this rebellious machine, daring to break the mold. Karen couldn't stand it. In her mind, motorcycles were noisy, dangerous, and completely inappropriate for a family-friendly neighborhood. They disrupted the harmony she worked so hard to maintain. And so, armed with her trusty HOA rulebook, she flipped through its pages late one night searching for ammunition. Finally, she found it. A vaguely worded section about non-traditional vehicles being prohibited unless explicitly permitted by the board. Bingo. This was all the justification Karen needed. Without bothering to speak to Jake directly, she picked up the phone and dialed the number of the local towing company listed in the HOA directory. With clipped precision, she reported Jake's motorcycle as a violation and demanded immediate action. The operator on the other end hesitated briefly, asking if she was certain about the situation, but Karen brushed off their concerns. Rules were rules, after all. The next afternoon, while Jake was away visiting family out of town, a tow truck rumbled into the cul-de-sac. Neighbors peeked out their windows curiously as the driver hooked up the gleaming motorcycle and hauled it away. By the time Jake returned home later that evening, the only sign of his prized possession was a hastily scribbled note left under his doormat. Scrawled in uneven handwriting, it read, "Dear Mr. Thompson, your non-compliant vehicle has been removed per HOA regulations. Please contact me for further details." Signed, of course, by Karen Miller. Jake stared at the note, disbelief washing over him. His motorcycle? Gone? Just like that? He felt a mix of emotions bubbling inside. Anger, frustration, and a growing sense that something here was deeply unfair. After all, He had followed every step required to temporarily park the bike outside his house. He'd submitted forms, paid fees, and even attended a brief meeting with the HOA board to ensure everything was above board. Or so he thought. What Karen hadn't counted on, and what would soon become glaringly obvious, was that Jake wasn't the type of person to let such an injustice slide. Little did she know, her impulsive decision to tow the motorcycle would set off a chain of events that would change the dynamics of Willow Creek Estates forever. For now, though, Jake simply clenched his fists, crumpled the note, and vowed to get to the bottom of this mess. After all, if there was one thing Judge Jacob Thompson knew how to do, it was fight for what was right, even if it meant taking on the infamous HOA Karen. When Jake stepped out of his car the next morning, the absence of his motorcycle still felt surreal. The empty space where it used to sit seemed to mock him, a silent reminder of what had happened while he was away. He couldn't shake the frustration, bubbling inside him as he replayed the events in his mind. A simple note under the doormat? No phone call, no warning, just the abrupt removal of something that meant so much to him. It wasn't just about the bike. It was about principle. Who did Karen think she was, swooping in and making decisions without even consulting him? Determined to get answers, Jake grabbed his phone and dialed the number for the towing company, listed on the back of the HOA handbook. After a few rings, a gruff voice answered. "Citywide Towing Services, how can I help you?" Jake introduced, himself calmly but firmly, explaining that his motorcycle had been towed from his driveway the previous day. The operator paused, clearly recognizing the address, and then asked Jake to hold while they checked their records. While waiting, Jake paced back and forth in his living room, clenching and unclenching his fists. His patience was wearing thin, but he knew losing his temper wouldn't solve anything, at least not yet. Finally, the operator came back on the line. "Sir, we have your vehicle here," he said hesitantly. "It was brought in yesterday afternoon based on a complaint filed by a member of your HOA board." Jake's jaw tightened. So Karen hadn't just acted alone, she'd involved others, dragging them into her mess. The operator went on to explain that the towing had been authorized under the HOA's guidelines, citing some vague clause about non-traditional vehicles. But when Jake pressed further, asking for specifics, the operator grew noticeably uncomfortable. "Look, sir," he said cautiously, lowering his voice. "The person who called us made it very clear they didn't want the bike returned without their permission. Honestly, we're kind of stuck in the middle here." Jake exhaled sharply, trying to keep his emotions in check. He understood the towing company was just following orders, but this situation was spiraling out of control. "Listen," he said firmly, "that motorcycle belongs to me, and I followed all the necessary steps to ensure it complied with HOA rules. If you don't release it immediately, I'll have no choice but to take legal action." There was a long pause on the other end before the operator finally relented. "Okay, Mr. Thompson," he said quickly. "We'll process the release right away. Just come down whenever you're ready." Hanging up the phone, Jake felt a flicker of satisfaction. At least one part of this ordeal was resolved, for now. But as he grabbed his keys and headed out the door, he couldn't ignore the anger simmering beneath the surface. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Later that afternoon, Jake arrived at the impound lot, a sprawling, fenced-in area filled with rows of abandoned cars and trucks. The air smelled faintly of oil and rust, and the sound of distant traffic echoed through the open gates. A young attendant greeted him at the entrance, clipboard in hand, and led him to the far corner of the lot where his motorcycle sat, untouched but slightly dusty from its overnight stay. Jake ran his fingers along the handlebars, inspecting for any damage. Thankfully, it appeared unharmed, though the sight of it sitting there against its will only fueled his resolve to confront Karen. Before leaving, Jake turned to the attendant and asked a question that had been nagging at him since the incident. "Do you happen to remember who called in the complaint?" The attendant hesitated, glancing nervously toward the office before leaning in closer. "Off the record? Yeah, it was someone named Karen. She sounded pretty adamant about getting rid of the bike." Jake nodded slowly, unsurprised but still irritated. Of course it was Karen. Who else would go to such lengths over a motorcycle? As Jake rode home later that evening, the wind rushing past his face, he allowed himself a moment of calm reflection. Riding always had a way of clearing his mind, grounding him in the present. But tonight, even the thrill of being back on the road couldn't fully erase the tension building inside him. Something about this whole situation felt personal. Karen hadn't just targeted his motorcycle. She had crossed a line, disregarding basic decency and common sense. And Jake, being who he was, wasn't about to let that slide. The next day, Jake decided to dig deeper. He pulled out his copy of the HOA handbook and flipped through its pages, searching for the section Karen had cited to justify towing his motorcycle. Sure enough, buried deep within the fine print was a clause labeled "Prohibited Vehicles," which vaguely mentioned restrictions on non-traditional or disruptive modes of transportation. However, upon closer inspection, Jake noticed something crucial. The rule explicitly stated that exceptions could be granted with prior approval from the board. And guess what? He had received approval, or so he thought. Frustrated but undeterred, Jake drafted a formal email to the HOA board, attaching copies of the documents he had submitted weeks earlier. In clear, concise language, he outlined the timeline of events, emphasizing that his motorcycle had been parked legally and that Karen's actions violated both HOA procedures and local laws regarding property rights. He concluded by requesting an immediate explanation and assurance that such incidents would not occur again. Within hours, responses began trickling in. Some board members expressed shock and concern, apologizing profusely for the misunderstanding. Others were more cautious, promising to investigate further. One reply, however, stood out above the rest, a curt message from Karen herself. "Dear Mr. Thompson," it read, "I acted in accordance with the rules and regulations set forth by our association. Your motorcycle is a hazard to the neighborhood, and I stand by my decision." Jake stared at the screen, incredulous. Did she really believe this nonsense? Her tone was defensive, almost accusatory, as if she were the victim here. It was maddening. But rather than firing off an angry response, Jake took a deep breath and reminded himself of one important fact. He held the upper hand. Karen had no idea who she was dealing with. Not just another suburban homeowner, but a judge accustomed to navigating complex legal battles. Over the next few days, whispers of the incident spread throughout Willow Creek Estates. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance from Jake now approached him during walks, eager to share their thoughts. Many admitted they found Karen's behavior excessive, even tyrannical. "She's always been like that," one woman confided, rolling her eyes. "Last year she reported my son for riding his skateboard too close to her flower bed. Can you believe that?" Others recounted similar stories, painting a picture of Karen as someone who thrived on control, often at the expense of civility. These conversations only reinforced Jake's determination to hold her accountable. Still, he knew better than to act impulsively. Instead, he bided his time, gathering evidence and preparing for the perfect opportunity to strike. That moment came sooner than expected. A notice arrived in the mail announcing the upcoming monthly HOA meeting, scheduled for the following week. Jake smiled to himself as he read the details. This was it, the stage he needed to expose Karen's misconduct and reclaim not only his dignity but also a sense of fairness for the entire neighborhood. For the first time since the incident, he felt a spark of excitement. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. Karen Miller was in for the surprise of her life. The day of the HOA meeting arrived and tension hung thick in the air. Willow Creek Estates Community Center, a modest building with beige walls and fluorescent lighting, buzzed with quiet chatter as residents filed in, clutching cups of coffee and notebooks. It was the kind of gathering where people usually discussed mundane topics like holiday decorations or whether streetlights needed brighter bulbs. But today felt different. The energy was charged, almost electric, as if everyone sensed that something big was about to happen. Jake entered the room a few minutes before the meeting was set to begin. He walked in confidently, dressed sharply in slacks and a blazer, his usual leather jacket swapped for something more formal. He carried a slim folder tucked under one arm, its contents carefully organized, copies of emails, documents proving his motorcycle's compliance, and notes detailing Karen's overreach. To those who knew him casually, Jake might have seemed like just another neighbor attending the monthly meeting. But there was an unmistakable edge to his demeanor tonight, a quiet intensity that hinted at the storm brewing beneath the surface. Karen, on the other hand, was already seated near the front of the room, her clipboard resting neatly on the table in front of her. She looked every bit the part of the meticulous HOA enforcer, her hair perfectly styled and her outfit pressed to perfection. Her expression was calm but firm, betraying no hint of worry. After all, she had always been in control here, dictating rules and doling out consequences without opposition. What could possibly go wrong? As the meeting began, the board chair called the room to order, welcoming everyone and running through the agenda. Topics ranged from upcoming landscaping projects to plans for the annual block party. Everything proceeded smoothly until it came time for community concerns. That's when Jake stood up, clearing his throat to get everyone's attention. "I'd like to address something important," he said, his voice steady and commanding. Heads turned toward him, curiosity piqued. Some neighbors leaned forward slightly, eager to hear what he had to say. Others exchanged knowing glances, having heard whispers about the motorcycle incident earlier in the week. Karen stiffened visibly, gripping her pen a little tighter as she watched Jake step into the center of the room. "My name is Jacob Thompson," he continued, pausing briefly to let the words sink in, "and I am a judge serving on the county circuit court." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several people straightened in their seats, suddenly realizing they were witnessing something far beyond the typical HOA drama. Even Karen's composure faltered for a split second, though she quickly masked it with a tight smile. Jake went on to recount the events surrounding the towing of his motorcycle, laying out the facts methodically. He explained how he had obtained proper approval to park the bike temporarily, citing specific clauses in the HOA handbook. He described the abrupt removal of his property and the lack of communication from Karen, emphasizing how her actions violated not only HOA procedures but also basic principles of fairness and respect. His tone remained measured throughout, but the weight of his words left no room for doubt. This was serious business. When he finished speaking, the room fell, silent. All eyes shifted to Karen, waiting for her response. For once, she didn't jump at the chance to defend herself. Instead, she hesitated, fumbling with her notes before finally standing up. I was simply enforcing the rules," she stammered, her voice less confident than usual. "The motorcycle is a non-traditional vehicle, and it doesn't belong in our neighborhood." Her argument sounded weak even to her own ears. Jake raised an eyebrow, letting the silence stretch for a moment before responding. "Enforcing the rules is one thing," he said coolly, "but abusing your authority to target someone unfairly, that's another matter entirely." He paused, allowing his words to resonate. "And let me remind you, Ms. Miller, that judges deal with cases like this regularly. When someone acts outside the bounds of the law, or in this case the HOA guidelines, they are held accountable. Always." The room erupted into murmurs again, some nodding in agreement while others glanced nervously at Karen. One elderly man sitting near the back chimed in, his voice carrying across the room. "You know, Karen, I've seen you push these rules pretty hard before. Maybe it's time we take a step back and think about how we're treating each other around here." Several heads bobbed in agreement, and Karen's face flushed red. But Jake wasn't done yet. He pulled out a copy of the email chain between himself and the HOA board, holding it up for everyone to see. "This isn't just about me or my motorcycle," he said, his gaze sweeping over the audience. "It's about setting a standard for how we handle disputes in this community. If we allow behavior like this to continue unchecked, it sets a dangerous precedent. Respect and transparency should be our guiding principles, not fear and intimidation." His final statement struck a chord with many in the room. Even those who hadn't personally clashed with Karen could see the logic in his argument. As the meeting wrapped up, several residents approached Jake to thank him for speaking up. Some admitted they had long felt uneasy about Karen's tactics but never knew how to address it. Others promised to support any changes aimed at preventing similar incidents in the future. Karen, meanwhile, sat frozen in her seat, staring down at her clipboard as if hoping it would offer some form of escape. For the first time in years, she found herself on the defensive, her carefully constructed image of authority crumbling under scrutiny. She tried to brush off the criticism, muttering something about misunderstandings and good intentions, but her excuses rang hollow in the face of Jake's unshakable logic. By the time the meeting ended, the atmosphere in Willow Creek Estates had shifted noticeably. Neighbors lingered in small groups discussing what had transpired and speculating about what might come next. Word spread quickly beyond the community center, reaching those who hadn't attended the meeting. By evening, nearly everyone in the neighborhood knew about Jake's confrontation with Karen, and most agreed that justice had been served, at least for now. For Jake, the victory was satisfying, but bittersweet. He hadn't sought out this conflict, nor did he relish the idea of publicly shaming anyone. But sometimes standing up for what's right meant taking a stand, even if it made others uncomfortable. As he drove home that night, the hum of his motorcycle beneath him, he allowed himself a small smile. This chapter of the story might be over, but its impact would ripple through the neighborhood for weeks, months, perhaps even years to come. Little did Jake or anyone else know, however, that Karen's troubles were far from finished. The fallout from her actions would soon escalate in ways no one could have anticipated, turning this seemingly minor dispute into something much bigger. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Willow Creek Estates, the question lingered in the air: what would happen next? The days following the explosive HOA meeting were anything but quiet in Willow Creek Estates. News of Karen's public dressing down spread like wildfire, fueled by whispered conversations at grocery stores, coffee shops, and even online neighborhood forums. For years, Karen had been a polarizing figure. Some admired her dedication to keeping the community pristine, while others privately resented her overbearing attitude. But now, with Jake's scathing indictment fresh in everyone's minds, the tide was turning decisively against her. Karen, however, refused to back down. In her mind, she hadn't done anything wrong. She believed she was protecting the integrity of the neighborhood, upholding the rules that kept Willow Creek Estates looking perfect. What she failed to understand, or perhaps chose to ignore, was that enforcing rules without compassion or fairness could have consequences far beyond hurt feelings, and those consequences were about to catch up with her. Jake wasted no time after the meeting. Knowing that words alone wouldn't be enough to hold Karen accountable, he filed a formal complaint with local authorities. He outlined the events leading up to the towing of his motorcycle, emphasizing how Karen's actions violated not only HOA guidelines, but also state laws regarding property rights and unauthorized seizures. To strengthen his case, he included copies of all relevant documents, emails, approval forms, and even the impound receipt from the towing company. At first, Karen dismissed the idea that her behavior might attract legal scrutiny. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to herself as she scrolled through yet another Facebook post criticizing her actions. "I was just doing my job." But when two uniformed police officers arrived at her doorstep a week later, holding a warrant for her arrest, reality came crashing down around her. It happened on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday morning. Karen had just finished brewing her second cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. Assuming it was a delivery person dropping off a package, she opened the door without hesitation. Standing there, however, were two officers, their badges gleaming under the sunlight. "Ms. Karen Miller?" one of them asked, his tone polite but firm. Karen nodded nervously, clutching her mug tightly. "We're here to serve you with this warrant," the officer continued, handing her a folded document. Her hands trembled as she read the words printed inside. "You are hereby charged with harassment and criminal mischief." Time seemed to freeze as Karen processed what was happening. Her face went pale and she stammered, But I didn't do anything illegal. I was following the rules." The officers exchanged a glance before explaining that her decision to tow Jake's motorcycle without proper authorization constituted a misuse of power. They informed her that she would need to accompany them to the station for further questioning. Neighbors peeked out their windows as Karen was led away in handcuffs, her protests echoing down the street. Some watched with a mix of shock and satisfaction, while others felt uneasy witnessing such a dramatic fall from grace. By noon, photos of the scene had surfaced on social media, accompanied by captions like, "Karma finally caught up," and "Goodbye, HOA Karen." The incident quickly became the talk of the town, drawing attention not just within Willow Creek Estates but across neighboring communities as well. As news of Karen's arrest spread, other residents began stepping forward with their own grievances. It turned out that Jake wasn't the only one who had clashed with her over trivial matters. One family revealed how Karen had threatened to fine them for leaving a child's tricycle on the porch overnight. Another neighbor recounted how she had reported someone for planting flowers that didn't match the approved color palette. Even minor infractions, like failing to sweep leaves off driveways promptly, had earned Karen's wrath. These stories painted a troubling picture of a woman, obsessed with control, willing to bend or break rules to assert her dominance. Local reporters picked up on the scandal, interviewing residents and publishing articles that portrayed Karen as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority. Headlines like, "HOA enforcer faces arrest after towing judge's motorcycle," dominated local news outlets, turning Karen into something of a punchline. Meanwhile, the HOA board scrambled to distance itself from the controversy. During an emergency meeting held shortly after Karen's arrest, members unanimously voted to remove her from her position. They issued a public apology to Jake and the rest of the community, promising reforms to ensure transparency and accountability moving forward. A new board member, a soft-spoken retiree named Margaret, was appointed to replace Karen, bringing a much-needed sense of calm and reasonableness to the role. For Karen, life outside of Willow Creek Estates became increasingly isolating. Friends stopped inviting her to gatherings, and acquaintances avoided eye contact whenever they passed her at the store. Strangers recognized her from the news coverage, sometimes pointing or whispering behind her back. The once commanding figure, who strutted confidently through the neighborhood, now walked with her head down, avoiding interaction whenever possible. Her court appearance added another layer of humiliation. Dressed in a plain blouse and slacks, Karen sat nervously in the courtroom as Jake took the stand. With practiced precision, he recounted the events surrounding the motorcycle incident, presenting evidence that left little room for doubt. When it was Karen's turn to speak, she struggled to articulate a coherent defense, her voice wavering under the weight of scrutiny. The judge overseeing the case, a colleague of Jake's, listened intently before delivering a verdict. Karen was found guilty of harassment and ordered to pay restitution to Jake for the costs associated with retrieving his motorcycle. Additionally, she was placed on probation and required to attend anger management classes. Though the punishment was relatively light, the damage to Karen's reputation was irreparable. Many residents breathed a sigh of relief, feeling that justice had finally been served. Others expressed hope that this incident would serve as a wake-up call for anyone tempted to abuse their power in the future. Despite the chaos she had caused, some neighbors couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for Karen. After all, she wasn't inherently evil, just misguided and overly zealous in her quest for order. Recognizing this, Jake decided to extend an olive branch. A few weeks after the trial, he sent Karen a handwritten note expressing his willingness to move past the conflict. "We're all human," he wrote, "and we all make mistakes. Let's focus on building a better community together." Karen hesitated before responding, unsure if she deserved forgiveness. But eventually she penned a brief reply, thanking Jake for his kindness and apologizing for her actions. While their relationship would never return to normal, the gesture marked the beginning of a tentative reconciliation. In the months that followed, Willow Creek Estates underwent subtle changes. Board meetings became shorter and less contentious, focusing on practical solutions rather than nitpicking minor infractions. Neighbors grew closer, bonding over shared experiences and mutual respect. And though the memory of HOA Karen lingered in conversations, It served as a reminder of the importance of treating others fairly and the consequences of forgetting that lesson. For Jake, life returned to its usual rhythm. He continued riding his motorcycle on weekends, enjoying the freedom it brought him. But every time he passed Karen's house, he couldn't help but reflect on the strange chain of events that had unfolded. Justice may have prevailed, but more importantly, the neighborhood had learned a valuable lesson, one that would shape its future for years to come. As the seasons changed in Willow Creek Estates, so too did the spirit of the neighborhood. The once rigid structure enforced by Patricia Whitmore had given way to a more relaxed and inclusive atmosphere. Residents who once tiptoed around rules now felt free to express themselves without fear of judgment or punishment. Front yards became canvases for creativity, some adorned with colorful flower beds, others transformed into vegetable gardens, or whimsical displays of outdoor art. For Alex Martinez, this transformation was proof that standing up for oneself could spark positive change far beyond what he'd imagined. By spring, the community had fully embraced its newfound freedom. Block parties became a regular occurrence, drawing families together for barbecues, games, and laughter. Children chased each other through sprinklers while parents chatted over lemonade and homemade pies. Even Margaret Hayes, the new HOA president, joined in, often bringing her famous chocolate chip cookies to share. Her leadership style fostered connection rather than control, earning her widespread respect and admiration. Alex found himself at the center of these gatherings, not because he sought attention, but because people genuinely appreciated his courage. Many residents approached him during events to thank him for challenging Patricia's authority. "You really opened our eyes," one neighbor said warmly. "We were so used to following the rules blindly that we forgot how stifling it felt. Now we're finally living in a place where we can breathe." Mia, Alex's teenage daughter, thrived in the revitalized neighborhood. She became an unofficial ambassador for change, organizing activities like movie nights in the park and charity drives for local shelters. Her petition to rename the annual HOA meeting to the Curtain Summit became a beloved tradition, complete with playful decorations featuring oversized curtain props. Every year, residents gathered to celebrate their collective resilience and share stories about how they'd reclaimed their autonomy. Patricia's departure left a void, but it also allowed space for growth. Without her constant oversight, neighbors discovered new ways to support each other. When someone fell ill or faced financial hardship, the community rallied to help. Meals were delivered, lawns were mowed, and childcare was arranged, all without any formal request or intervention from the HOA. This sense of mutual care strengthened bonds and reinforced the idea that true harmony came not from rigid rules, but from genuine human connection. Despite the progress, reminders of Patricia's influence lingered. Occasionally, old habits resurfaced. A few residents still hesitated to paint their front doors bold colors or hang unconventional holiday decorations, worried about stirring controversy. But these fears gradually faded as the community continued to embrace individuality. Margaret encouraged experimentation, reminding everyone that diversity added character to the neighborhood. "Let's celebrate what makes us unique," she often said. "That's what creates a real home." Meanwhile, Alex remained steadfast in keeping his blackout curtains, a decision that had become symbolic of his journey. To him, those curtains represented more than just fabric. They embodied his refusal to conform to unreasonable expectations. Whenever someone asked why he hadn't replaced them, he smiled and replied, "Because they remind me that sometimes standing your ground, even over something small, can make a big difference." Word of Willow Creek's transformation spread beyond its borders, attracting attention from nearby communities. Local newspapers featured articles about the neighborhood's shift from rigidity to flexibility, highlighting the role Alex played in sparking change. Other HOAs reached out to Margaret for advice on fostering collaboration and reducing conflict. Willow Creek became a model for balance, a testament to the power of compromise and understanding. For Alex, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Workdays passed smoothly, and evenings were spent enjoying quality time with Mia. They often sat on the porch sipping hot cocoa and watching fireflies dance in the twilight. On weekends, they explored hiking trails, visited farmers' markets, and attended festivals hosted by neighboring towns. Though Alex had initially moved to Willow Creek seeking peace and quiet, he found something even better: a true sense of belonging. As months turned into years, the memory of Patricia grew fainter, but not forgotten. Her story served as a cautionary tale, reminding residents of the dangers of unchecked authority. During the annual Curtain Summit, speakers occasionally referenced her actions, using them as examples of how obsession with control could harm relationships and erode trust. Yet there was no bitterness in these reflections, only gratitude for the lessons learned. One crisp autumn evening, as golden leaves swirled in the breeze, Alex stood in his driveway admiring the vibrant hues of fall. Neighbors waved as they walked by, some stopping to chat about upcoming holidays or plans for winterizing their homes. Across the street, a young family decorated their yard with pumpkins and scarecrows, laughing as their dog chased falling leaves. It was a scene straight out of a storybook, one Alex never thought possible when he first arrived in Willow Creek. That night, as he tucked Mia into bed, she looked up at him with a thoughtful expression. "Dad," she said softly, "do you think things would have been different if you hadn't kept those curtains?" Alex chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Maybe," he admitted. "But I like to think we'd have found another way to stand up for ourselves. Sometimes it's the little things that lead to the biggest changes." Mia nodded, satisfied with his answer. As she drifted off to sleep, Alex lingered in the doorway, reflecting on her question. He realized that while the curtains had been the catalyst for everything, the real change came from within the community itself. By choosing to prioritize kindness over control, Willow Creek had transformed into a place where people truly belonged. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the living room window, Alex adjusted the blackout curtains with a smile. They were more than just fabric. They were a reminder of resilience, unity, and the beauty of standing firm in the face of adversity. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with life, a testament to the strength of its residents and their shared commitment to creating a better future. Willow Creek Estates wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was authentic, vibrant, and alive, with possibility. And for Alex and his neighbors, that was enough.